This week, Allison Miller joins us for an interview. Mick Douglas of the SANS Institute, former host here on Security Weekly, will join us for a technical segment on feeding common logs into elk stacks for fun and profit, I guess. We report on the security news. I heard Apple had a vulnerability this week. Certainly spent some time talking about that, as well as a smattering of other stories. WordPress makes the news for actually debuting some hardened security features. The NSA Red Disk data leak, HP silently installing telemetry bloatware on your PCs, because that's always fun. Cryptocurrency was in the news quite a bit this week. Hoping Larry can fill us in on that. There was a mining script that runs even after you close your browser as well, so we'll discuss that. All that and more on this edition of Paul's Security Weekly. This is Security Weekly, for security professionals, by security professionals. Broadcasting live from G-Unit Studios in Rhode Island, it's the show where exploits run wild, packets aren't the only things getting sniffed, and the cocktails flow steady. It's Paul's Security Weekly. I'm, of course, your host, Paul Aws-Iot-Button. Excited to be here, as always, on Paul's Security Weekly.
Hi, and welcome to the show. I totally introduced our host right now, but I've got a totally awkward boner.
What? Where? Oh, hey! I'm in the studio with you guys. That's kind of cool.
Sounds like a plan.
And we'll at least have one person listening.
That's right. Just saying.
Yeah, I know, and I appreciate it, and I'm glad you enjoyed your spooning with Jeff. But
Hey, that's
Actually built a new office.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, third baby on the way, so I needed a new office.
Nice.
I lost my old office. That's now the baby room.
Brought to you by... Has your network been breached? CyberReason can help you answer this question. CyberReason products hunt for threats within your network and eliminate them in real time. To CyberReason, real time means within seconds. Founded by former military hackers who don't play by the rules, they've built this experience into their platform. Harness ingenuity and imagination, not just code, to defeat attackers. CyberReason. Disrupt the adversary and let the hunt begin. Endgame automates the hunt for both known and never-before-seen adversaries in enterprise networks. Built on unique knowledge on the adversary's tools, techniques, and tactics, Endgame's centrally managed agent prevents, detects, and responds to advanced adversaries in the earliest stages of the kill chain without prior knowledge. Endgame. Automate the hunt. The average time between being hacked and realizing you've been hacked is 1 year. Can you afford to let an intruder roam your network for that long? Can your company weather the fallout when this comes to light? Black Hills Information Security can find the bad guys in your network and train you to do it yourself. Email consulting@blackhillsinfosec.com to find out how a hunt teaming engagement can help you find a persistent threat in your network.
And welcome to the show. But first, let me introduce you to a man who I thought had a brilliant idea a couple shows ago. He said, Larry, what we really need is an Amazon dash button that when you press, it orders a Raspberry Pi 3. So, Paul, I present to you your very own Amazon AWS IoT dash button so you can program just that. Paul Aws-Iot-Button, folks.
Wait, you didn't program it for me?
You gotta figure that shit out.
It's
yourself.
programmed to order something. Now I'm really afraid to push it and see what's going to be delivered to my house. Welcome, everyone, to Paul's Security Weekly, episode 538 for November 30th, 2017.
It actually just orders Preparation H to Santa's house.
Well, that would be appropriate. Poor Santa. I'd like to introduce our host for this evening, Larry Pesci, of course, to my left. Thank you very much, Larry, for my wonderful gift.
You get to figure it out now.
I will. I may
awesome.
actually make it order Raspberry Pis because we never seem to have. Did you see the Raspberry Pi tree on the table in there?
No.
Yeah, Kyle built like this little tree.
Nice.
Yeah, it's pretty awesome.
Nice.
It's pretty awesome. I'm excited to be here. It's going to be a fantastic show. On the lines via Skype, Mr. Jeff Mann. I can see you now. I can see Mr. Jeff Mann. How's
Look
it going,
what
Jeff?
I have. I have Vegemite. And the next time in studio, Joff is going to teach us how to eat it.
Vegemite. Do I dare ask?
Yes, I've had Vegemite. It's delicious.
Okay. I'll take your word for it because I've never had it and I don't know what it is. And therefore, I will transition into introducing Mr. Joff Thayer. It's Joff Thayer. On the lines via Skype. Joff, welcome to the program.
G'day, Paul. How are you? So, Jeff and I did have a brief conversation about Vegemite. And if you're willing, it won't be the next show because I'll be in Munich. But we can do a Christmas show where we talk about cooking toast, in a toaster, of course, and how to apply the Vegemite properly so that you will enjoy the taste.
I don't think making toast is really cooking. I'm just saying it's more like heating bread rather than actual cooking.
So what
gotta
he's saying
I
is
gotta
make sure
fancy it
there's
up
a
a little
toaster
bit.
in the studio in 2 weeks.
I do have a Darth Vader toaster in the studio that puts the Star Wars logo on the side of the toast. It's not a great toaster, but it looks really cool, and the toast looks really cool.
We just need toast, and we need some butter, some good butter, and a little bit of Vegemite. I'll show you how to do it. And once you know how to do it right, see, the biggest mistake in the U.S., people over-apply the Vegemite, and that's the trick. So we should do this together so we can enjoy it.
Well, I'd say I'm excited, but I'm not quite sure the excitement quite sums it up.
You should be excited.
I
You
am
might
excited.
end up programming your little button to order Vegemite.
I might.
Just
I
saying.
could be the Vegemite
Well,
button.
you could get addicted.
Quick announcement. Make sure you do two things for us. One, subscribe to our mailing list, securityweekly.com/insider. We'll give you exclusive updates and invite you to some awesome webcasts that are coming up. One is with Pony Express, and one is with Logarithm. And we'll be talking about problems and solutions associated with those two organizations. You're going to want to tune in. Larry
Yeah.
is going to come do a webcast with us.
Yeah.
So Larry's going to talk about Wi-Fi exploits. And who better to talk about Wi-Fi exploits than Larry Pesce?
Yeah, it's sort of little Wi-Fi exploits, but with very much an IoT twist to it.
Absolutely.
Finding
Absolutely.
IoT in your environment.
We just installed some IoT devices here in the studio so we could monitor them. We have the Pone Pulse here in the studio. So we did Smart Things, Ring, and Arlo.
Nice.
So you probably already discovered those devices and are poning us as we speak, Larry, but we have those devices nonetheless. You can go to securityweekly.com/subscribe. Subscribe to all of our shows: Secure Digital Life Hack, Naked News, Startup Security Weekly, and Enterprise Security Weekly. All of those feeds are available as separate shows for you to download, listen, and hopefully enjoy. I'd like to introduce our special guest for this evening, who's been waiting patiently. We had some equipment problems. Allison Miller is here with us, who's been working on the intersection of cybersecurity, human behavior, and predictive analytics for almost 2 decades. She has a great reputation in the industry, and I apologize for not having you on the show sooner. It's wonderful to have you on the program tonight. Allison, welcome to the show.
Hi, everyone. Nice to see you.
Good to see you as well, Allison, and it's nice to meet you, albeit virtually. Allison, tell us how you got your start in information security.
Oh, sure. Well, I actually started off in an IT security analyst role at a pharmaceutical company. I had been trying to find my way into a security group. It was still sort of a new and emerging discipline at the time, and I couldn't find my way in. So I ended up just taking an IT role, and then one thing led to another, and I asked a lot of uncomfortable questions, I guess. And so when they decided to establish a security function, I became the first hire into that group. And so I helped them develop out all of their policies, their incident response, their network monitoring, vendor reviews, threat intel. I got to help build a program from the ground up, and then things kind of took off from there.
Allison, when you were working in IT, as you said, years ago, there wasn't many official roles in information security. What were some of the challenges and some of your success stories in convincing people that security was a big enough problem to define entire roles in the organization whose sole job it was to do security?
Well, I think certainly early along, I think a lot of what I found in my work is that a lot of the development of these programs were either driven by response to an incident, which is why FUD works so well, right? Anytime there's a big breach or issue, then there's sort of a response, and there's an opportunity there to kind of sell a vision about what is needed. But then the second piece of what was really driving development was compliance. It wasn't until further along in my career that I was working more in a risk capacity, where I was able to make really good arguments just from a business perspective that security was something that needed to be built in and thought about from the very get-go when new products were being developed, as opposed to simply something that is a response later. and being in payments and financial services really helped with that, because a lot of the risks manifest as direct loss, and people who move money like to know where their money is at all times. And so you can make better kind of obvious business arguments or take position with them when you can talk in dollars and cents. And that has been something that has been really useful throughout my career.
So even outside of the financial industry, like, how have you been able to make that correlation between dollars and cents and security, which is, I think, something that many of us struggle with to this day still?
Right. So my specialty is a little specialized in the sense that I specialize in developing large-scale detection systems that you could kind of think of as operating native into a customer-facing platform. So I've worked in payments, in which case the detection is anti-fraud technology. I've worked on social platforms, in which case it may be anti-spam. I've worked in games, in which case there's sort of an anti-cheating or an anti-griefing kind of aspect to things. And I've also worked in ads and on phishing prevention and malware detection, which are also sort of similar. And across all of these, there's account security and preventing against account hijacking, however a login details may have been scooped up, whether it's by phishing or through grabbing creds off of a third-party breach. So with all of these types of threats, there's an relatively obvious impact when a transaction goes bad or spam gets delivered or a phishing attack goes through, where you can kind of approximate then what the impact is, but more importantly, you can see when harm has been done. I think what a lot of IT security professionals face that's really difficult is trying to explain what the impact is of, say, a threat or vulnerability when the loss is more indirect, meaning, information gets copied or leaked. You still have the information. Maybe you don't experience a direct financial loss because of it. That makes it a little more difficult to make a business case. When what you're trying to prevent is a fraud transaction from occurring, you can explain the cost of declining a good transaction by mistake versus experiencing the loss associated with a fraud transaction that goes through. And then it's already in dollars. It makes it easier. So these sort of unit-based detection problems, I think, are a lot easier to quantify and then make a business case back to the finance and business folk.
Could we extend that into some of the other areas of security? And I've always described the fraud problem as something that is, like you said, relatively easy to define scope. And we know, like, money's moving from point A to point B, and if there's some issue with it, it's very well defined. When we get into the threat landscape for an organization that's very vast and broad outside of fraud, people tend to get lost and lose sight of that message. Are there lessons we can learn from fraud prevention that we can apply to traditional information security?
Yes, and I'm going to have to take my cat ears to get into this with you.
Well, it's getting serious now. Now we're serious.
All
now
right.
I'm scared.
The ears are off. The gloves are off.
The ears are off. So this
Take
is
your
one of the
booties off.
things that I am so excited to bring back to IT security or cybersecurity or whatever we want to call the sort of next generation or next philosophy that we're going to use as we try and figure out how to secure large systems, because I think there's a lot of economic drivers that go unexamined, that if we could get a little more comfy with them, then we could incorporate them into the case we make for doing our work. So I find that anti-fraud is very disciplined in a way that intrusion detection can't be, because a fraud transaction is very structured, and it's a very structured event. Whereas when you're trying to put your arms around a whole network and evaluate the cost, say, or risk associated with chains of events, there's things that can be learned, but it's difficult to apply it directly. However, I'm absolutely of the belief that we can get more mature as far as our metrics for performance and some of the lessons that we can take around quantifying and measuring impact, loss, and success. And I think we actually have to. I mean, this is one of the things I get a little bit het up about, because there is no such thing as a security risk, an IT security risk. It's not separate. What I mean is it's a business risk. It's either a risk or an exposure, or it's not. And if all of our stuff, because we're security nerds, gets lumped into security risks and it's evaluated separately from all the other things that a business needs to take in consideration, we're dead in the water as far as advancing our practice and actually protecting our platforms and our people, because they're not separate things. They're like things. And so we need the language and the tools to make what we do part of the business, as opposed to we're making a case to the business to do something. I mean, we are part of the business, and we need to talk like the business and present cost benefit to the business in ways that are accessible to them. It's not just a communication problem between us and marketing, let's say. I think it's a communication issue around how we talk about ourselves and think about ourselves within the industry, not just with our colleagues and other groups, if
Jeff,
that kind of makes sense.
I'm sorry, Jeff, you had
a little bit there.
Yeah, thank you, Allison. I have questions, but Jeff also has a question, so I'm going to let Jeff go first.
Well, Allison, you just dumped probably 10 episodes worth of content on us. I wanted to back up to what you were saying about fraud. I was at a fraud summit, I don't know, sometime in the last year or so, and I was listening to all these different talks about people talking about this, that, and the other with regards to fraud and anti-fraud activities. And, I kept thinking, wow, this is all security. They're talking about security. And I asked somebody about that, and I kind of got a whoa, that's a whole different group. We don't talk security around here. We're fraud people. So I'm curious as to if you've encountered that in your space of what you're doing with the anti-fraud discussion and learning, and how do you bridge do you see that there's silos there, and how do you bridge that, or how are you bridging that?
Right. So every organization is different, of course, but yes, in my experience, the anti-fraud or the anti-spam team, they're very different than the security team. And I think there's a couple things that might help there. One is we kind of need to get a little bit more expansive about who we consider to be a security person. If we only consider threat intel analysts and reverse engineers and network security engineers and IR people as security people, then we miss out on learning from all of these other adjacent groups. So when I was in financial services, the risk group, those were the anti-fraud people, and they were primarily statisticians because they had these automated models, and if fraud went up, they tightened the model. And if they wanted to approve more transactions and they were okay with taking slightly more losses, it made financial sense, they loosened the model. So they had one thing. They sort of throttled things up or throttled things down, depending on the business return that they wanted and what was going on in the environment. And they barely spoke to the folks who were in security because they were seen as, those are the folks who are securing the network, securing our laptops, making sure that the site doesn't get DDoSed into wherever. But if it was something that was customer facing, it was something that was affecting customers, it was dealt with in this other risk group. And so I actually have the way that I've sort of bridged these groups is by personally kind of having one foot in one group and one foot in another group. Well, or maybe an octopus is a better metaphor since there's usually 8 to 10 different groups. I mean, anti-money laundering might be a different group than the fraud group, might be a different group than the security group, might be a different group than the folks who are actually building the products. And those were definitely different groups than the customer service groups. And so the way that I have bridged those is by just being like a polyglot, speaking the language of these different groups and trying to interpret between them. When I was at PayPal, I was in the risk group, meaning the one that was making decisions about the fraud models and building those fraud models. But I was responsible for account security. Now, the security team also had an interest in this, but they didn't have any consumer-facing or user-facing real estate on the site, if you want to think of it that way. That was all my domain. So what I just did was I tried to coordinate, because when it comes to the threats to customer account security, I want my risk modelers modeling, but I also want to make sure that my peeps who are paying attention to what's happening in the dark web are able to give us information to help us design and implement things better. So I think that's going to continue to be the case. Every organization is different, but typically the folks who are doing anti-abuse or who are doing security are a different group of people than the ones who are actually building and managing the products that folks are using. My experience is intensely platform focused, in the sense that I've worked on platforms where people log into an account and versus something like boxed shipped software, or I spent very little time in pharmaceuticals. But wherever I've gone in my career, there's been all of these different groups who affect the overall customer experience, and what they do affects the overall risk of the organization based on the products that they're creating and how they manage them.
Allison, how can we better foster communication between the teams that are doing security for customer-facing applications and the teams that are doing IT security? I feel like we use the term IT security, and we should use the term information security, I think, more accurately, because, I mean, while they are two different functions, the threats are coming at the entire organization with no regard for which group handles what.
Right. I think that one place where groups can kind of get together and figure out what each other's strengths are is in the area of threat modeling. And then also, I do think that the folks who are doing information security, cyber, whatever you want to call it, they can provide a feedback loop back to the product developers or the product managers that those folks might not get without some additional help. So I think that would be a really valuable place to kind of build that relationship, so that when a product manager has a question about, my MVP, I'd like to get some minimum viable security for my MVP, who could help me figure out if this is going to work or if this is going to be a problem. So threat modeling is a place. So I've done a lot of threat modeling for things like account security issues across all kinds of different user flows. And that's a place where folks like doing that. It's creative, and they can bring their own expertise to bear.
Yeah, and that's a constant process as well, where I think both sides still have a lot to learn, is specifically when we talk about DevOps and containers. I feel like we're in a bad situation when it comes to that. And there are organizations that are leading the charge, but I think the majority of businesses today haven't understood the impact of that. Have you noticed that and have suggestions as to how we can bridge that gap? Excuse me.
Can you say that question again? How we can bridge the gap in other places?
Yeah. So there's when you talk about like speaking to the product manager about having questions about how to improve product security, how do we allow them to talk to security and have those communications take place while both sides understand the problem? I feel like today a lot of the IT security folks, or information security folks, I should say, don't understand some of the new technology being used. So when they come to some questions, we're like, I don't know yet. So, but also the developers don't know how to do the threat modeling either, because they don't fully understand how to roll something out in a full DevOps model. So how do we get both teams talking and educated?
Okay, yeah, I understand what you mean. So that's it. And what you're sort of talking about with the security folk not necessarily understanding the underlying product, the underlying product to secure it, is also definitely a place where a conversation should be initiated. The reason why I bring up threat modeling is because I feel like we have a bit of a pipeline problem in security, and I'm not talking about hiring. What I mean is that if we as security folk offer to kind of freelance consult for product makers too early in the process, then we burn too many cycles consulting on vapor. But if they get too far along in the design and architecture process, then we have to unwind things. So it's really difficult to figure out where to make a fixed process and have kind of a review gate. And also that feels very compliance-y, and most product makers, especially ones that are trying to build something new, they are really good at avoiding any kind of, they're good at putting off or avoiding formal review. So I suggest something like threat modeling, because as you say, it can happen at any time because threats can change. And every once in a while, even if you did threat modeling on a specific set of flows 2 years ago, maybe things have changed. And it's always a good time to kind of, check your threats. And so I think that that's a good way to develop a relationship, but also to kind of key makers into some of the problems that security builders need to be aware of. The best product managers that I have worked with have come to me with products that they're working on when they need input. And they know when they need input because they've actually done some of the due diligence ahead of time, because we had gone through a soup to nuts kind of program with them on a previous product. So it's not education and awareness exactly. It's really about figuring out how you want to work with these other groups in the business and collectively what the risks are and the threats are that you're managing against, and figuring out how to make that process a little bit more organic. Also, I think it's useful to have formal review gates and make sure that the entire business understands, nothing leaves the ranch until it's been checked and graded by whoever needs to do that, and make sure that you've got security folks sitting near QA folks so that things don't get pushed to prod that need to be rolled back immediately because they're a surprise.
Are many of the problems that we have today in security more communication and relationship based, more so than technology and so much process based?
Do I think the problems are more relationship based? Is that
more of a communication and relationship building issue, or lack of building relationships, more so than a technology sort of issue?
That's a good one. I don't really know. I mean, I've certainly heard a lot of folks sort of saying that security folks need to get more soft skills and work on their communication skills. But I almost feel like it's not really that. It's really just that in the technology world, everyone speaks a different language. And so a lot gets lost in translation if you don't you need to make sure the lines of communication are really open, and almost like you need to practice speaking with each other so that someone on the other end understands the words coming out of my mouth. And when I say something's really important, that they understand where I'm asking them to focus and what kind of changes are need to be made. It's a little more like, I feel like it's a little bit more of an organizational maturity question. a lot of us work at companies that are very new, and we're doing things that haven't been done before. And so roles are really fluid, and the people who you work with, your colleagues, may be pretty fluid. And so I guess that falls in under communication problem, but I think it's less a question of, I'm an introvert and I don't really want to walk over to this other department to talk to a bunch of people who don't want to hear what I have to say and I mumble. It's less that kind of communication problem and more of an organizational design, organically, where is this whole ship going and how do we all work together, that kind of communication problem. It's not just an information security issue. It's like all of these sort of development organizations need to figure out how they want to work, and then they need to practice so that how they work works.
Questions from others?
I had one question related to that, Paul. So, Allison, do you think that historically information security, I guess this is a bit of a statement and a question. Historically, I think information security professionals have been perceived as the people that like to say no a lot. Do you think that makes it more difficult to build those relationships because of that historical perception?
Sure. Yeah, of course. But we're certainly not alone in that. I mean, who else likes to say no? Legal likes to say no. Compliance likes to say no. Finance likes to say no. There's lots of teams that the problem happen. The risk to them is that they've approved something and it goes wrong. Versus maybe there are teams where they have troubles when they didn't go far enough fast enough. So that's a sort of a gentle tension. And I believe that there are times when information security, compliance, legal, and finance are going to have to say no. And that's just part of their role. But I do think that, times have changed since IT security was in a corner. It's now a really center stage important issue for a lot of different types of businesses. Ones that never really thought of themselves in the information business now are. And so I think that this is an opportunity. Whatever our role was in the past, we needed to figure out what we want our role to be next. And I think that's a bigger problem, and it's on us, not on these folks who we've worked with historically and maybe have impressions of how we work and why we work. I think it's on us to kind of articulate what it is that we want our role to be in a mature operation. And I'm actually excited about that.
I think, Allie, you touched on something interesting from a very practical standpoint, talking about how IT or security or whatever we're calling it, the technology is more important now than ever before. But in the beginning, which wasn't that long ago, it was very, and I've done a lot of consulting work, been to a lot of client sites, and IT 9 times out of 10, and security was usually attached to IT, was in the basement, was in a temporary building out in the back of the campus, was in a building down the street, was in a building across town. So very, very physically removed, very physically not present within the organization. And I agree with you that, the times have changed, but I wonder if any of us have seen a change in terms of just the physicality, the location of the technical people, and yes, we all need to talk together. Yes, we need to work together more. But if we're in separate buildings, if we don't know where people are, that can only compound the problem. What are ways to try to improve that without just going to companies and saying, hey, you've got to, buy a new building and put everybody together in one place?
Well, I think that there's a couple trends that may help us out. One is, there are a lot of organizations that have moved to DevOps. Again, I come from a world of platforms, so there are a lot of different types of organizations out there that this model may or may not be relevant. But I love the idea that we're starting to realize that a lot of us have roots as administrators, right? A firewall admin, an email admin, network admin, whatever it was. Someone else picked the technology. It was just our job to manage whatever it is. And with DevOps, I feel like there's an understanding that you can't just build and push something. You build something, and that's the beginning of operating whatever the thing is. And so this idea that engineering and operations are together, they're both builders. Together, they make sure the right system is getting built and operated. I think that that's useful for us. And I feel like the sort of trend of security not just being an administrative function, but being a build function. We are building security in. We are building our security defenses. I love that as a trend. I think that when we show that we are building and we are contributing to our organizations, in these positive ways where what we do is additive as opposed to simply kind of like the insurance policy, I think that then we get appreciated more. Also, if you have a building full of security admins and you're locked in a basement, please tweet. Let us know. We'll call your HR folks. Maybe they'll let you out.
Or not, depending on how nice your HR folks are.
Right. So, and my experience is a little bit different than some folks, I think, because a lot of my career recently has been I work more with developers than I do with folks who are sort of traditional IT security. Part of that has to do with the focus of my work. I've been focusing a lot on how do we protect consumers? How do we protect small businesses online? They do not have the money to invest to hire all of us to help them out. So how can we make kind of the default technologies that they're using more secure, which is a really interesting challenge. But the way to do that, the way to scale that is not to get everybody an IT security, not to create the worldwide IT security group. It's to make sure that things that ordinary folk are working with default to secure, and that they have useful options that they can choose and, opt into that are going to step level them up to the level of security that they deserve.
It's not the level of security you need, it's the level of security you deserve.
I like that. That's a great quote.
Wherever we could go from there. Should I bring my cat ears back on? Because that's like
Sure.
That's a cat ear moment.
That's a relevant reference, right?
Allison, I know you don't represent your employer here today, but your journey in your career has led you into a particular place, and I want to give you the opportunity to talk about whatever you have liberty to talk about in terms of what you're doing today.
I see. So, yeah, I've been able to work at a long list of fun factories like Visa and PayPal, eBay. I worked with Skype for a while. Thanks, Skype, owned by Microsoft now, of course, and most recently Google. So, and Electronic Arts. Don't forget, I didn't do anything with anyone's Sims installation, I promise, but I did get to witness some things associated with that. So I've been at Google, and that's been really interesting. I spent some time working with the Safe Browsing group, and that's the team that I was sort of referring to when I was talking about how to protect everyday folks as they are browsing around the web and trying to avoid things like falling for phishing scams and from downloading malware. And that's been an interesting project and set of features, because when I first heard about it, I thought, oh, okay, sure, it's a feature in Chrome, but I didn't really understand the level of work and engineering behind it, because what that system and what that team do is they're crawling the web, and they are looking for pages that are hosting phishing sites or malware. But in order to figure out something is phishing or malware, you have to have some really interesting data pipelines and classifier systems to do that with a high degree of specificity, which they do, and they have very low false positives. But that's a pretty big problem, and it's been really interesting to see how engineers and how folks might try and build that in so that the default is to something that is secure. While I was at Google, I have had a chance to work with other teams too, including some of our threat intel teams, which are amazing. But of course, I really can only talk about the things that are a little bit more public and consumer facing.
So, Allison, I think one of the concerns is that the browser becomes too bloated, too much more like an operating system. However, there are some that feel and believe that the browser should do more in security. How do you recommend, not speaking for Chrome specifically, but in general, how would you envision working that balance between providing functionality, efficiency, and performance, and also providing some of that security aspect of it?
Sure. So just speaking about safe browsing again for a second, I just think the design of that is so cool because they've figured out a privacy preserving way to make most of the work server side so that the client only really has to do anything if there's a local match to something that we know is bad. And the most recent version of the protocol, we made it much more bandwidth respectful so that folks on mobile devices could enjoy the same protections. Developers can create things that work sort of natively so that whatever kind of communication app you're in, if there's a link to something nasty, you can figure it out locally and you don't have to, phone home or what have you too often. And you don't have to spend a lot of bandwidth on updating the latest databases of partial hashes. So it's a really clever design, and we could talk about that for a while. But I would probably defer a lot of those questions about browser security to someone who works more specifically on Chrome or Firefox or Safari or what have you. It's what's interesting to me is that when I think about what's running on my laptop and when I'm mobile, I realize that I have almost the same set of apps on my laptop now as I do on my phone. I have a few specialized apps that are applications, software packages that I use for quantitative analysis that obviously I'm not going to do that on my phone, but for the most part, what I'm doing with my technology right now, in my consumer technology, is I am browsing the web in new forms through apps. Slack is an app, but Slack is basically the web. Skype is an app, but Skype is basically the web. And so if you think about the average consumer and how much technology they're really using, their browser is their window through to the internet. So I think that it makes sense to put as many protections in there as possible without inhibiting performance. But that's where the risk is, because that's how most people are using their devices right now, unless I'm mistaken and there are a lot more people, creating spreadsheets than I was expecting. I think most people's use of technology now is really about the web. So the browser, the risk has moved from, there's still risk on the desktop, but the sort of threat vector, if you will, is the browser. So I think that it's really important that we figure out how to make the defaults as secure as possible.
And who would have thought that when we first saw Mosaic in Netscape? Jeff, you have a question?
Yeah, and you may not be able to touch on this, Allie, and that's fine. I'm just curious in the discussion of consumer protection and what you're doing. Just this week, I'm not even sure if it's one of our news items, but the issue of net neutrality is coming up just in the last week or two. Does that cross into what you're doing at all, or are there concerns, from you personally, from Google as a company that may or may not rely on net neutrality? or at least
Wow.
cares about the safety of the
Wow.
consumer.
He went
like I said,
there,
you
Allison,
may
he
not
went
be able
there.
to answer or respond to it, but yeah, I'll
Yeah,
throw it out there.
I think I shouldn't answer or respond to that. But
I don't think you should either.
Fair enough.
It was a good try, though, Jeff.
But thank you for the question.
Yeah, no problem.
I have 5 more questions for you, Allison, if you're ready to play 5
Wow.
questions with Security Weekly.
5.
5.
No, I'm not. But let's do it anyway.
Alrighty.
Hold on. I suppose.
You're going to put your ears on.
But yeah,
Take
go-
a swig,
oh,
beer,
drink
maybe some
and put
ears.
your ears
in it.
on.
Yeah, okay.
And that looks like it's good beer. Is that Fat Tire?
It is Sierra Nevada.
Oh, all right.
Nice, very nice.
Yeah, that's decent beer. We'll take it.
Yeah, it's okay.
Yeah.
Sierra Nevada, what? Because
It'll
it's not
do.
a green label.
It'll do.
Yeah, it'll do.
So, Allison, 3 words to describe yourself.
Ensafening the cybers.
If you were a serial killer, what would be your weapon of choice?
An icicle.
If you wrote a book about yourself, what would the title be?
Underbelly.
In the popular game of Ask Grabby Grabby, do you prefer to go first or second?
No.
Valid answer.
She really thought about that one too. The look on Allison on your face was priceless. Allison, choose 2 celebrities to be your parents.
Alive, dead, fictional, or otherwise.
To be my parents? Oh man. This
That's a
is
hard
bad.
one.
I'm so bad with names.
Give us
Batman and Catwoman.
Whoa.
No, that's lame. That's
Halle-
weird.
Halle
That's
Berry?
like circular.
Halle Berry was
Which
Catwoman.
version
Yeah, Halle Berry
Yeah.
was Catwoman. Was it
in
Michael?
a movie?
Was it Michael
Eartha
Keaton?
Kitt.
Eartha
Eartha
Kitt. There
Kitt.
you go.
Eartha Kitt
There
and
you go.
Batman?
We can just say Batman. That's actually I think that's a really cool answer. There's no right or wrong answer,
Okay.
but
There
Allison,
you go.
thank you so much for appearing on Paul Security Weekly. It was wonderful having you. Nice meeting you, and great conversation. It was great.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks, Allie.
With that, we're going to take a short commercial break. Come back with Mick Douglas, who's going to teach us about elk stacks, that is. Stay tuned.